How are these verses not contradictions? Easy. Exodus 20 verse 8 states about a Sabbath day, while in Romans 14:5 states about fasting. Errors in the Bible, or more specifically, Bible contradictions. Type that in Google and the first site you'll come across to is from American Atheists. On their site, they state, if written by a perfect being, then it must not contradict itself. As a collection of books written by different men at different times over many centuries will be expected to contradict each other. They list their contradictions to be the Sabbath day, the permanence of earth, seeing God, human sacrifice, the power of God, personal injury, circumcision, incest, trusting God, the holy lifestyle, punishing crime, temptation, family relationship, the resurrection of the dead, and the end of the world. If you've been counting, that's 15 contradictions listed. I'm not here trying to say that the Bible is perfect. I want to know if these supposed mistakes really show that the Bible is wrong. I looked into this a lot. This is like my third time going over this, but I really want to hear from you. Please share your ideas and arguments in the comment section. Let's talk about it. That's all I got for an opening. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Exodus chapter 20 verse 8. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. Romans chapter 14 verse 5. How is it that in Exodus chapter 20 verse 8, God appears to mandate the observance of a Sabbath day, but while in Romans chapter 14 verse 5, Paul seems to give believers the opportunity to value any day they see fit? Huge hint. To truly understand the verse, just like with any other verse in the Bible, it's important to look at the context. Let's start with Exodus chapter 20, where the 10 Commandments are being introduced. While the Sabbath day is the fourth commandment, it is being mentioned two other times beforehand in the Standard Bible. The first is in Genesis chapter 2 from verses 2 to 3, where God had been finished creating the world in 6 days and he is resting afterwards on the seventh day. The second instance appears just a few chapters earlier in Exodus chapter 16 from verses 22 to 39. Just for a little bit of context, the Lord provides meat and bread for the Israelites as food. Moses, by the Lord's command, told the Israelites to gather twice the amount of bread on the sixth day to prepare for the seventh. Some of the Israelites didn't listen to the Lord and tried to gather more bread on the next day, with the Lord responding, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. For that reason, he gives you bread for 2 days on the sixth day. Remain, everyone in his place. No one is to leave his place on the seventh day." Two instances where the Lord instituted a Sabbath rest before the command on Mount Sinai. Now this isn't some type of Old Testament-like command. Jesus, his disciples, Paul, they all observed the Sabbath and didn't deviate from the Lord's command. Now I feel I have to say this before continuing any further. I believe a lot of people believe the Sabbath is a day of bondage made for a certain group of people. And it might be right, because how is it that God does not want us to work on a Saturday, eat some good food, relax, help someone in need? I mean, that's the worst of a bondage right there, but then again, what did I know? The Sabbath. Take some rest. Now continuing with Paul, he gets a bad rep from people. I personally believe that many doctrines and denominations are formed when people take one verse from Paul's letters and create a whole interpretation based on it. You cannot read the Bible with that understanding. I'm not going to lie, as Paul is a difficult person to understand. Just look what Peter wrote in 2 Peter chapter 3 from verses 15 to 16. To understand Paul's letters, you have to read the whole letter, investigate the history of why he wrote those letters, and read the beginning books of the Bible to see what he's referencing. Paul wrote the book of Romans to Rome. That's shocking, right? But we don't need to read the whole letter to understand what Paul is referencing in verse 5. Just chapter 14. Starting at verse 6, it reads, "He that regardeth the day, regardeth it unto the Lord. And he that regardeth not the day, to the Lord he doth regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks. And he that eateth not to the Lord, he eateth not, and giveth thanks." This verse provides a parallel structure of comparing things. The first sentence splits certain people into two different days, one that regards a day and one who doesn't. Now for the next sentence, it splits certain people into two groups once again, one who eats and one who doesn't. I believe this gives a hint on what Paul was referencing. When reading the whole chapter in the whole in the King James Version, the words eat and eateth and meat appear a total of 19 times. This chapter begins early on and ends with Paul's discussions on food. Why would Paul insert a line about the Sabbath if the whole chapter is talking about food? Stop judging on when you eat. Let's not despise the man who eats only vegan. By the way, you know the commandment that God gave us for a sign about the Sabbath? It doesn't matter anymore. Eat in faith, stop judging about eating. It doesn't make sense. Now, when going back to verse 5, I believe there is more evidence to support that Paul is mentioning a day of fast rather than the Sabbath day. Hold on, where'd you get that fasting from? You're introducing words into the text, you might be asking. Now wait, by that logic, the text doesn't say or imply a Sabbath or a day of rest. You'll be introducing words into the text with less evidence than I provided. But there is more. In the time of Christ, people were still discussing about how to fast. Just look at Matthew chapter 9 from verses 14 and 15 and Luke chapter 18 verse 12. It isn't a shocker to say that believers of Christ have disagreements over things just like with any other group of people over the years, whether small or large. Paul is telling believers not to cause division in the body of Christ. Not saying we can't have disagreements, but if those disagreements are over non-important matters and can cause disunity, should we really be stressing about these disagreements? The faith which you have as your own conviction before God. Happy is the one who does not condemn himself in what he approves, but the one who doubts is condemned if he eats, because his eating is not from faith, and whatever he is not from faith is sin. Now, the Sabbath day. These two verses should not be seen as a contradiction, as there is no correlation with these verses. They are being claimed as a contradiction from looking at one verse, from one chapter, from one letter, from one guy that is known to be a difficult person to understand.